All right, welcome everyone to the third episode of the Adoption Series, and this is the last episode of it. So the first one we talked about my adoption, from birth to my adoption. The second one was from people that I'd interviewed, and so this third one we're going to be talking about people that have adopted. And I didn't talk to anybody on this. This is just a lot of my own thoughts on this. So the last one went through 8 questions on that I asked people, and the last one was, would you ever adopt? And a lot of people said no. Majority of them did. There were a few that I talked to that did say they would, or there was a couple, I think, that said that they have adopted. So this episode, we just want to talk a little bit about people that have adopted and what all that involves. I think that there's a lot of the main reason, I guess, that people would adopt would be because they couldn't have children. I think that's probably the most common reason that people would. The other one is maybe they've already had 2 or 3 and they have an opportunity to adopt a child, and so they do. The other one is maybe they would like more children than what they have, so they do. Anyway, so I'm talking to people that have been adopted into families with multiple other people that have been adopted. A few of them have said that they weren't sure about that, because if there's parents that want to keep up with, I guess, maybe their peers, or maybe a group that they're with, or a denomination that maybe they're in, and those people there have big families, that possibly there is that desire to have a big family, and so they just adopt multiple people. Now, is that a good idea? There are some that said, no, it's not a good idea. Just to adopt, just to have a big family is not a good idea. There again, I think that's probably, parents that maybe feel the pressure of having a big family, and so they do that. The one thing that I was thinking about that is, if you do that, I think there's a lot of thought that needs to go into that, because I think that there's a lot of parents that don't understand the work that goes into that, to have, let alone one adopted child, but let alone have multiple adopted children. There again, you're adopting multiple children, and they'll have their own personalities. Even though they may be siblings, they're still going to have their personalities, and you deal with that with your biological children anyways. You can have whatever, 4, 5, 6, 2, and they all have their own personalities. So maybe as far as raising a child one way does not work for the other. There are people, I think, that do that, and they have a system that everybody fits into that system, and that's how they run their family. Now, that may not be all bad, because I think that there does need to be structure. I didn't come from an overly structured home. There was structure. We did have structure. We had a certain time we ate supper. Generally, everybody was sat around the table. and we had chores to do, and there were things that we did that was like every Saturday. My brother and I, we had a list of chores we needed to do every Saturday. When we got home from school, put your stuff away. You could have a snack, and there may or may not be some chores to do. But it wasn't, I wouldn't call it an over-structured family that I came from. I would say we were just structured in a good way, but not necessarily over. So that's one thing I think to remember. And there again, I know there are different things that work for different families, but we're talking about people that are adopted. And I think one thing that, as I talk about this, I talked to one person that really gave me good advice. And honestly, I never even thought about this, because growing up, I was white until I looked in the mirror. In other words, I was just one of my family. I didn't even think about color being or being different as far as color wise. And so I just thought that. But the one advice that he gave me is, he said that as parents, we need to remember that the child we adopt or children we adopt are not our DNA. And so that's one thing. If you guys listen to this series, I think that's one thing to take away from this whole series, is just remember that child is not your DNA. Sometimes we have a hard enough time with our biological children trying to, maybe we try to mold them and try to get them to do what we think they should do, or maybe this is what my family did, and so this is what you need to do. And there are biological children, and that sometimes is hard enough. But just remember that with a child that you're going to adopt or have adopted, is they're not your DNA. I don't care what your last name is. They're not that. They're not your last name. They are made up differently. Now, I understand we're all humans, and so we all have a lot of the same issues, right? But there are certain family traits that we all have, and adopted child may not have those family traits. And so there's a lot of things that my dad or my brothers might have traits in that I don't. Now, there are some things that obviously have been an influence on me, or have rubbed off on me, if you want to use that term, that my dad did or didn't do. And so those things can be just simply by just habits, by watching somebody, or simply being around somebody or listening to somebody. And so we pick up sometimes on those habits. But there's a lot of things that sometimes we think that a child should be, and we don't maybe understand why they're not that way. And it's a very simple reason. They're not our DNA. And so I think that was probably about the best advice after talking to everybody that I really got. Because I just, there again, in the home I grew up, in the situation I was in, I did not think about that. The other one was, I think that a lot of emotional scars that you need to remember. And some of those could be simply, I know that there are children, especially that are born here in the States, that have been adopted in the States. And some of those came from mothers that were on drugs or were in an abusive relationship. And you've probably heard the term trauma in the womb. And I think that's a valid term. And depending what all trauma there was, whether it was drugs or whether it was physical violence, alcohol, and that can affect a child, that can stunt a child mentally. And so I think there's some of those things. Sometimes when you do adopt a child in the States, you don't know maybe their medical record or their history. I think probably there's a pretty good chance that you're going to know that if you adopt in the States. And so that's just something to be aware of, that hopefully that was already explained to you before you adopted the child. And then there's people that have adopted a child that are, handicapped or cripple or a physical ailment with them. And that obviously is visible, so you can see that and so you can prepare for that. And so that's just something that if you're going to adopt, that just be aware that there's a lot of trauma, scars, if you will, that go with that child. And some of that stuff is also when, maybe if you adopt when they're older and they can remember things. There's also that maybe when they're younger, you don't necessarily face that, you don't see that maybe, but as they get older, some of that stuff starts coming to the surface, and you start seeing that, and you have to start dealing with it. And but if you find yourself in that position that you have adopted and you're not sure what to do, there's a lot of people you can talk to, a lot of help out there for you if you want it. And there again, I talked to a lot of people that had a lot of good advice. And if there's something you want to know, get a hold of me and I can get you in touch with somebody that can then help you with just working through a lot of issues that children do have. I was recently talking to, well, actually I wasn't talking to him, I was recently heard of a parent that was just, they hadn't adopted. And like I said earlier, it seems like the ones that haven't adopted tend to kind of know more than everybody else. But they just couldn't understand why a child would want to go try to find his or her biological family. They just couldn't figure that out. And I think that's another thing, that if you have adopted or you're thinking about it, is that is something that probably will come up. At some point, that child is going to start asking questions, and they're going to want to know about their biological family and where they came from and so on. So that is something to just remember and maybe prepare for. And there's different ways you can prepare for that. You can have maybe a file of their biological family, whether there was all kinds of medical issues in it, or where they were, where they grew up, all those kinds of things. And so there's some things that you can prepare for that way, or you could just simply prepare, okay, my child is going to someday, we're going to have to sit down and talk about this, and so I need to have a plan of what we're going to do. Like I said earlier in, I believe it was the first episode, that my parents, well, my dad anyways, and then my stepmom, but they took me down to El Salvador to meet my family I believe I was 15 at the time. And there again, I'm not saying there should be a certain age that you start, maybe if they do want to find them, that you help them or you assist in that. That maybe was a little young for me. Maybe 18 would have been better if I would have waited or if they would have waited, or however that was. But there again, it wasn't necessarily a bad thing. It just, maybe my advice to that would be maybe wait till they're a little older, 18, 20. And there again, there's people that they never wanted to. And I don't think that should be forced on them if they just say, no, I really don't want to find them. And there again, there's some people that haven't found their family until they were, in their 40s, married, had children of their own. and then they decide, I'm going to go find them. So there again, I think that that's something that you should leave up to the child as far as, if they want to seek out their biological family instead of saying, we're going to go do it. Now, in my case, I wanted to go do it. Like, again, I knew my family. So I think that is something that be careful doing it too young, because it can, especially a child that has been adopted and at an older age, it can bring up a lot of things. But so there are just a few things that if you have adopted or you're thinking about adopting, just think about that, like I said, they're not your DNA, and at some point they are going to probably want to find out where they came from. And that's not a bad thing. I don't think that parents should feel hurt by that, especially if you gave them a good home life and you loved them like your own and treated them well. There's nothing wrong with a child that says, hey, I want to go find out, my family or my history. So there again, I don't think you should be at all upset about that. Now, going on a little further here, some of you that I've talked to said, and I will just say again that I'm grateful for everybody that wanted or was willing to talk to me, because it just gave me a new perspective. It gave me a lot of information on this subject. And just taking the time and sharing with me, that was really good. And can't thank you enough for that. However, a lot of you had said that meeting your family, you felt a connection. There you felt, whether it was, I'm not sure exactly how to describe that, but they just felt a bond when they met their family. Now, that said, I didn't feel that way, and I think maybe it was because of my connection with my adopted family that I had, that I wasn't looking for another, I wasn't looking for something else. As far as just, there's some people sometimes that go out and they try to find something. They want to identify with something or be connected to something. I wasn't looking for that. So when I met my biological family, it was great. It was wonderful, overwhelming, excited. But the bond and the connection, I did not feel that. But I was thinking about that as I thought about that question, or that question, that answer. I had a sister that I grew up with, about a couple years older than me, and we were pretty close, played together, did a lot of things together growing up. And her friends are kind of my friends, and I was a younger brother. I tagged along a lot. And so she passed away here a few years ago of cancer. And as I thought about that question, I was like, okay, I understand what people say when they say they felt a connection when they met their biological family, because I think that was the same connection that I felt that I lost when she passed away, is that connection's gone. There's things in the family that come up and nobody knows or nobody remembers because they weren't there, and that connection is gone. And so I lost that connection. And so I think that is the same feelings that some of you had, or people have, when they meet their biological family, is that connection of just the emotional connection and the physical connection, and then that's the past as far as blood related, so on. Even though my sister and I, we were not blood related, but we were, for all intents and purposes, we were very close siblings. We were siblings. So I think that that helped me to understand maybe that a little bit, in as far as when people said that they felt a connection. I'd never thought of that before. So again, going through this series was really good for me, because there were a lot of things that I'd never thought about. And so that, and then just looking at my life and just saying, okay, well, maybe that's why I felt that way, or maybe I didn't understand that, or my feelings or something. And so, anyways, it was a very, very good thing, worthwhile thing for me to do. And so, anyways, those are just a few things on, again, if you're going to adopt, or if you have adopted, and there again, you need to treat them like they're your own, like your flesh and blood. I think even people that have biological children sometimes can have a favorite, and the others say, well, I was favored, or he was favored, she was favored. And I think a lot of that stems from just maybe age. You know, the oldest one works, maybe the younger one generally is a little more spoiled. And you know, the parents are younger when the first one's born, and maybe not quite financially set, and so maybe when the younger one comes along, maybe they have more money, maybe a little more time, and so they do more trips. I know my younger siblings, they got to go on trips that I never did. However, I thought I was, you know, blessed by all the trips that I got to go on. And some of them they never did because they were younger. So I think that just biological children, it deal with that. And so when you adopt and you have a child that is different, I think it's very important to remember that. My dad, after he married his second wife, I believe they were in town, and he bought his biological daughter, he bought her some things and didn't buy the other daughter, her daughter. And she called him out on it. I'm sure she was kind about it. And he was like, oh, well, sorry, he didn't think about it. And so I think that there are some things that, you know, we, as parents, we can kind of do. And so just remember that, you know, if you adopt and you have other children, it's very important to treat that child, love that child the same as your flesh and blood, and make sure there is no difference there. And I know sometimes that people that have been adopted don't always turn out how their parents think they should turn out. And I'm there again, I'm not sure what to say about that. And that question is it's a pretty loaded question, and I don't even know if there's even a right answer for that question. I get that asked. I'm sure that a lot of other people get that asked. And I'm guilty of using the same thing sometimes too. I say, oh, well, they were adopted. And then I'm like, well, yeah, okay, so was I. But I think that that's a lot of times if somebody that's adopted and they don't turn out how their parents or how other people think they should turn out. And it's easy to just say, well, they were adopted. So that question, I don't even know what to say to that question. I don't have an answer for that question because it's, like I said, I don't think there's any right or wrong answer for that question. There's a lot of things. You know, did the parents do what they should have? Did the child do what he or she should have? Like I said, our own biological children, sometimes that's a struggle to try to, sometimes they just don't turn out how like we think they should. So I don't know that that's a fair question to be asked, just because a person was adopted, but nevertheless, it is still a question that's being asked. But I would say if you asked me that question and say, why didn't somebody turn out that was adopted? Probably I would just simply say maybe it had something to do with their home life. And I know that a lot of people don't want to hear that question, and it might get your feathers all fluffed up hearing me say that. But I think for the most part that's probably where it starts. There again, everybody's different. They're not your DNA. Every case is different. You need to handle every child different. What works for one doesn't work for the other. And you can be scheduled and you can not be scheduled, and neither of those ways work. So I think it's just simply just trying to figure out what works for that child. I know somebody that their kids didn't turn out the way they wanted, and it was probably one of the children told me that the parents did not take interest in what they wanted or what they were interested in. And it wasn't anything that I think that the parents had a problem with. It was just simply it just didn't interest them, and so they just never showed any interest in that. And if the child would be interested in something they were interested in, then they would show some interest. But if they weren't, then they basically just did not spend time with that child or show any interest. And so I think that's, like I said, biological children, we can do that to them. But as somebody that we bring into our home through adoption, I think it's pretty important to just take that extra time. And I know it takes a lot of your time, but there again, you are the one that made that choice to adopt them. So just understand when you adopt that there are going to be possibly more sacrifices than your own child. And we say children are a sacrifice. If you're going to spend time with them and you're going to teach them and you're going to nurture them and mentor them, and that all takes time. But just prepared to spend more time with a child that is adopted, because if they're older, they might have some issues, some trauma, or some just issues. And if they were an infant, maybe as they get older, they start having feelings. And so you're just going to have to just plan on taking more time with that child. So anyways, I think that wraps it up for this third episode. But thanks again for everyone that participated in this. And then just thank you everyone that's listened to this. So if you didn't listen to the first two episodes, go back, listen to those, and then this third episode will make sense to you. But anyways, follow on Instagram and follow on YouTube, and more content will be coming out. But this closes out the adoption series, so thank you.